lives in the small river town of Regalsville, Pennsylvania, with her husband and 2 sons. She has a lifelong interest in gardening and native plants that grew out of childhood walks in the woods with her grandparents and mother. She and her husband host more than 70 different kinds of natives on their quarter-acre lot in their neighborhood. Kate's a woman of many interests and talents. She's also a novelist and painter interested in sense of place. She's worked as a geologist and environmental scientist for more than 5 years. She teaches geology and a course on landscape, culture, and story of place at Moravian University. And if that's not enough, she also co-directs the Moravian Writers Conference. I know that you will learn a lot from Kate's presentation. Last summer, some friends sent me the link to Kate's Native Plants for Small Yards book, which she allows you to download. I'm going to show a picture of it right here. And I had my local copy shop printed out as a little booklet. Then I used its design ideas in creating a small garden in my sidewalk strip. I really appreciate learning from Kate, and I know you will too. Please join me in welcoming Kate to the Native Plant Society. Thank you, Kate, for being here.
Thanks so much, Deb, for that nice introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me. And thanks so much for everybody who's here tonight to listen. I really appreciate your time. And I am going to, be talking about this book that Deb described. But I'm going to spend a decent amount of time kind of describing what led up to this book. So this is a book that I wrote it came out in 2018, and I did work on it. There were a lot of other people involved. It wasn't just me. And I'll describe really the 5 years of work that went into kind of leading up to this book and the content of the book and why we sort of chose to write the book that we did. So I'm just going to go back here for a moment because this book came out of a project that was related to funding that a group called Lehigh Gap Nature Center. I'm going to show you a slide of that organization in a moment, but they are, that's who I worked for. It's a nonprofit in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. I'm just going to show you that real quick so you know where we are. Most of the talk describes the Lehigh Valley. That's where this project took place. Here's Pennsylvania, here's New Jersey. The Delaware River flows between the 2 states, and this 2-county area, Lehigh County and Northampton County, that's the Lehigh Valley. So the Lehigh Gap Nature Center is located in the Lehigh Valley. They're well known for their native plants and using native plants to restore the landscape around that property. And anyway, they got a grant for 5 years, and it was $20,000 a year that they could spend on some native plant initiative. And so I learned of this project. I was actually, had a friendship with the person who got the money, and I left a job that I enjoyed because they needed someone to lead this project, and I was so excited about the opportunity to do something with native plants. It's a love of mine, and it was also there was an opportunity to work with community, and that's also a longstanding interest of mine. So I went to work, I left a job, went to work for Lehigh Gap Nature Center, and my job was to lead this effort to figure out how we were going to spend $20,000 a year on native plant projects for 5 years and what we were going to do with that. And so I want to also just recognize that I did work there for that 5 years. I knew it would only be a 5-year time period because the grant funding would only last that long. The funding came from the Lehigh Valley Greenways primarily, which is an organization that, under the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. But most of the funding came from the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation. And they sort of started it all off. And then my salary, I was just a part-time employee during that time. My salary was paid for with a private funder. So I just want to recognize the whole sort of backdrop of the project. So this is just a picture of Lehigh Gap Nature Center. We'll just say very quickly, if you're ever in the Lehigh Valley area and you're interested in native plants, I'm assuming everyone tonight here is interested in native plants, please pay them a visit and hear their story. It's a great restoration, sort of landscape restoration story with native plants. So I started this project, and one of the first things that we did, and so right, I'm gonna talk about the book, but I want to sort of tell you about that 5-year project, because that had everything to do with the contents of the book, which I'll describe in just a little bit. I started this project. We wanted to, we knew we had this money. We knew we had it for 5 years, which is, a gift when you realize that you have some time and you can sort of think about what you want to do long term. And so, we got a steering committee of people together to sort of help guide the project. And that included, members of all the conservation organizations in the Lehigh Valley area, as well as academics from colleges and universities, and sort of anybody who was kind of interested in doing work with native plants were part of that steering committee. And we thought very deeply about what we wanted to do in the very beginning. We thought, okay, we have 5 years. What do we want to dream up? The only stipulation we had was that we had to use native plants. So the world was wide open in what we could do with that funding. And so, I'm going to kind of go over some of the things that we decided to do, but then I'm going to describe a little bit more detail about how we came to those decisions a little bit. So, Lehigh Gap Nature Center, that was the organization I was working for. They are, do environmental education. They're also interested in sort of landscape restoration. So we had sort of those goals in the back of our minds. And we decided that one of the things that we wanted to do was to really try to engage a broad community in putting native plants into their yard. And what we really wanted to do was kind of reach beyond the choir, sort of beyond people who already maybe knew about native plants or understood sort of their role in sort of the local ecosystem. We wanted to kind of reach beyond that and really try to engage people who maybe had never thought of a native plant or had never heard of that before. And the idea in our most ideal world, what we wanted to do was get as many property owners and residents as possible to just even experiment with one native plant, to just try to really build ecological change one tiny yard at a time. And so that was kind of our lofty goal. And what we ended up doing with that primarily with that funding, and I'll go into this a bit more, was we installed native plant gardens in 40 public spaces in the Lehigh Valley. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we decided to focus on small spaces, the small yard. And again, I will talk about that. But one of the things that we knew we wanted to do, that we thought of from the very beginning, was, okay, we have this gift, we have this funding. What can we end this project with? Like in 5 years, what do we want to do that will last? And one of the things that we decided early on was that whatever happens, we want to make sure that we end up with a really practical guide that residents can use. So that was kind of our goal from the beginning. We dreamed that from the beginning. So some of these decisions, I'm just going to sort of share with you our thinking in the beginning of the project. So, we started this project in 2014. We knew that most, again, general public, that's who we were really trying to reach. Most of the general public had experienced, most likely, native plants in sort of one of two ways. There's the top picture there, which is sort of, this beautiful meadow look on maybe a larger property. very gorgeous to my eye, but perhaps not to everyone's eye, and also maybe requires a slightly, a larger setting. Or the bottom picture, which is a botanical garden, that there are many botanical gardens around where I'm from, Bucks County area, and south of us. Many of those botanical gardens these days are using native plants in their landscape in very beautiful ways. People go to see those, but it can, I'm not sure that someone visiting this particular landscape would feel like they could take examples there and apply them to their own yard. There are also teams of gardeners that that work on these landscapes, so they're very highly maintained, and maybe hard to for sort of a regular resident with a regular yard to sort of get ideas and understand how they might be able to take some of these plants and apply them to their own yard. So we knew we had these sort of two, this is was sort of the examples that were out there in 2014, and so we wanted to provide some examples of native plant use that were different, that maybe people would feel like they could apply to their own yard. We also, at the very beginning of our project, did some social science. We looked into the social science behind how people make decisions about their yard. So this might seem strange, but social scientists do, there's a group of them that do study how people make decisions about their yard. And, one of the things that this social science says, so these are peer-reviewed kind of studies, is that when people are, deciding what their yard is going to look like and how they're going to, put plants in or not put plants in, they want, certainly this does not speak for everyone, but most people want to fit in. They want to be normal. They want their yard to look like their neighbor's yard. They want the yard to look like it fits in with the community, with the neighborhood. So that was important for us as we were planning our project, that we realized that we needed to meet people where they were. If we wanted people to experiment with native plants, then we needed to give them examples that would make them fit in with their neighborhood. So that was kind of part of our strategy. Other social science, another interesting piece I remember is that people are more willing to experiment in their backyards. So the front yards that are more public facing are typically not a place where people are going to want to do something slightly different. That's even more of a pressure to fit in the front yard, and that people really, their individual styles and their, maybe if they're wanting to experiment with something, would more likely happen in the backyard situation. So, we realized that people didn't want to be that different, and that if we were going to put examples out there in the community, that it needed to fit with kind of the neighborhood. So, and that we wanted to think along these lines of sort of traditional landscaping, at least for our project. And certainly this isn't something that everybody needs to do, but for our project and our objectives of reaching the general public, we had to think about, well, people in that, especially in that front yard situation, clean, neat rows, trimmed hedges, lack of weeds. So some of the things that we assumed in the beginning, I say most people, many people, I don't know if it's most, but many people have smaller properties, particularly in the Northeast, and particularly maybe like in a more urban setting. People generally want more of a manicured look if we're looking at the broad cross section of people. And that at least in 2014, and I think maybe this is still a lot kind of true, is that, there are a lot of native gardens that examples out there for the public that feel out of reach or impractical for everyday resident. We realized, we knew that cost mattered, and that maintenance was going to be hard. We weren't going to tell anyone that they were going to put in a garden and they would never have to weed. That was, we were always very clear that gardens require weeding, no matter how well designed they are. That is true. So, so part of our strategy then was knowing all that, and that's kind of all of our front end thinking, was that we needed to normalize the look, the look of natives. So how to do that? Well, so what we thought was, why don't we work with community partners in public spaces, so places that people would go in a public setting, and put in native plants, gardens that look pretty, and would also maybe feature a sign that would help educate people about natives. And the idea was to try to normalize the look of native plants in the landscape. So in the Lehigh Valley, that 2-county area, we set about trying to find partners who were interested in a native plant garden. We spent our money on buying plants, helping them design those gardens with their collaboration, so that they were sort of aesthetically appealing, that they were in public spaces that people would visit, and people would start to like look at these plants and be, start to sort of feel like, oh, this looks nice. I might want to try this in my own yard. So that was kind of the idea. I mean, and just for example, like if you think about going to the grocery store, or if you go to a business, or any of those kinds of places that we all go, typically we don't see native plants, and we typically see just a handful of sort of non-natives and possibly even invasive plants in the landscape. So people see that over and over again, and then you think maybe, oh, those are the only options, if you don't really know plants, if you're just a person out there. So the objective for us with those, and we put in 40 of these gardens, was to introduce these plants to people, and to sort of normalize this idea. We, along with this, we put in 40 gardens. We did most of that work on the front end. So like on the front end of that 5 years. So most of them went in the first 3 years. While we were doing that, and sort of simultaneously, we were also doing a whole lot of public outreach. So I say we, but I mean me. I went to, did a lot of talks publicly everywhere, where I was primarily kind of doing the education about kind of the ecosystem benefits of native plants, and why plants are beneficial, and the connection to pollinators and all of these things. I ran garden design workshops where people could come and design their own little space and get native plants at the same time. We organized a conference in which we invited landscapers to come and learn about native plants. We had a newsletter that went out bi-monthly that was all about like all the native plant initiatives and things people were doing in that 2-county area. We had partnerships with other native plant organizations. We worked with we collaborated with the Master Gardeners. I know there's a New Jersey Master Gardener group. There's one in Pennsylvania. Super, super active. If you haven't heard of that organization, it's a very grassroots garden community, fantastic group of people. We worked with them, and we also worked with all of our libraries. So I contacted every library in the Lehigh Valley and offered, if they wanted, a suite of books that would, for all ages, about native plants, from the youngest child to, people who wanted to maybe look at design with native plants and things like that. And we bought books for all libraries that were interested and offered to do programming associated with those books. So we were I was constantly also going into the community and doing this work, and then also, you know, as we were putting in these native plants, it was kind of like going on at the same time. During those public conversations and all of that public programming, you know, I always, I used a very open approach to use of native plants in a landscape, so, or in a home. You know, I feel this way personally, and I think it's just a more inclusive kind of a way to speak to people that, you know, it's okay to use natives and ornamentals. You can mix those up. If you have your grandmother's lilacs or whatever it is, and you love that, or you have your friends' tulips, you know, whatever, that's great. You know, garden space should be yours. That was kind of our message. But we did educate about invasive. So that was where we would say, you know, these are the, you know, this is the difference between ornamental and invasive. And you just have to, you know, make sure that you're not using invasives in your landscape. So that was the one thing that we did discourage during that public programming. So our, you know, our big message here over and over again was that our yards can be healthy, beautiful places. So, you know, they can be beautiful, and natives make them so much healthier. And then you can also support the local ecosystem. So again, lots of education about that during this time. And so I'm just going to show you a few examples of those 40 gardens that we put in. 38 of them were successful over the long term. So we partnered, as I said, with a community partner. So in this case, it was the Allentown Library. During that partnership, they, you know, in order to get the plants and design help, they signed a 5-year contract with us that they would maintain that space. So, you know, that was true for all 40 gardens. And so we did one at the Allentown Library. This was the original garden setting, you know, these sort of shrubs. This is what it turned into. I would love to go back and take more pictures of these now that it's, you know, much later, but this is a church, you know, again, this is before, this is after. This is Bethlehem Catholic School. So we went all over the place, did all kinds of different settings. In this case, the environmental science teacher's classroom was here. These were her windows. And she wanted this garden out there so that she could have her students, you know, experience some actual life and see the connection between plants and pollinators and birds and all of these things. I'm just going to show you these 3 again, because I want to show that there's a lot of difference in how these gardens look, right? So this one is very manicured, like a lot of mulch here, these stones and things. This one much less so, okay? This one even, you know, a different kind of a look. So the reason for that is that we, you know, when we installed these projects, we were guided by the people that were hosting the garden, because we wanted them to be invested in those gardens. So I spent time, you know, with them, thinking about the design and what was going to be sustainable for them in their circumstances, what was going to be comfortable for their setting. And they did the work, you know, for the most part. Like, we got the plans, we had the design, but, you know, the students in the school did all of this mulch, and they decided to do this kind of outline. I had nothing to do with that. So that's, you know, that was part of the success. The 38 out of 40 successful gardens was, I think, you know, this kind of engagement and sort of invitation to these, you know, different garden partners to really participate from the beginning in a sort of more invested way. And they were responsible for the maintenance too. So we worked with a homeless shelter. This is a place located in Easton. They have no dirt, so they just have containers and raised bed garden. They're primarily growing vegetables, of which we were not involved. But we did supply them with 3 containers with pollinator plants to help them pollinate their vegetables. So, you know, we did all kinds of different things. This is a business, Martin Guitar, famous destination. Many thousands of people come to visit Martin Guitar in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. That's where it's located. They have a huge campus. It's very landscaped. The head of Martin Guitar is very interested in wildlife. So he wanted a native plant corner of their property. And so, this was a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to engage lots of people who would come to visit. And this garden expanded many times over the years. This was one of the first ones we did initially in 2014 and expanded every year after that. This is before, this is after. This was on a very landscaped campus. So, we had to kind of blend a little bit with that. We did use mulch and things like that to kind of match the rest of the campus. I will just point out, this is the sign for this project. Each of these projects had an informational sign that, that showed the plants, like pictures of the plants in bloom, and made the connection to kind of an ecological connection, and described what this garden was about, because that was kind of our objective with these public gardens. So each one of them had that kind of signage associated with it. For the designs, when we were working with people, so I am not a trained designer at all. I've never, I just, for the designs, I used a piece of paper, graph paper, I used a pencil and a ruler, and maybe some colored pencils, and I just made stuff up. And I mean, that's really all that's all you need. Because I've been a gardener all my life. And so one thing that I could do is I could think about, okay, this garden location where they want to put this garden, what is the sunlight amount? What are, the plant height, where's the window? We don't want plants growing above the window. We want some layers, right? Bloom time, we want something blooming every season, or something interesting every season in this garden space. So, when I was designing these gardens, these are all the things I thought of with my graph paper. Amount of moisture, is it dry, is it wet? What could be some interesting plant textures and structures. I also thought about the gardens as they would be viewed from inside, right? Because so many of us look at our gardens from our window, our kitchen window, or wherever inside window. So what's the view from the inside? So these are all the things that went into thinking about the design of those spaces. Again, just sort of based on like looking at nature, keeping things simple. Right? If we look in a natural wood setting or a natural meadow, keeping things simple, using repetition, right? There's like repeating plants from the front yard and the backyard and this corner and that corner brings sort of a cohesive designed feeling to a property. And massing plants. So what I mean by that is like, typically plants don't grow here, one here, one here, one here, they grow in a bunch, right? Sort of a collection, a little mass. And then there's another kind of grouping if you look at nature. So those are the sort of things, those are the sort of ideas that went into any design that we did for any of those community partners, those 40 gardens. These are the same things I would tell, when we would hold workshops for groups of people to design their own spaces. These are the things that we would think about. So one of the things that those 40 gardens helped us with was that I went back post-installation to each of those gardens 3 times a year, spring, summer, and fall. And I took photographs every time. And I went over and I had a checklist of everything that had been planted there originally. And I went and I noted what was working, what wasn't, what was dominating, what was behaving, all the stuff. And so, in some cases we had, 4 years of post-installation data that we tracked over that time. So, one of the things that those 40 gardens helped me with was that I was experimenting. Well, let's try this design. Let's try this. Let's try these plants. Let's try that, grouping of plants. And I could see over time what worked and what did not work. So I just share that with you because, you know, all of that sort of knowledge went into kind of creating this book and these examples that I'm going to show you in a few moments. The other thing that we did while we were, you know, sort of towards the end is, well, we were constantly interviewing and talking with our garden partners. So those 40 gardens, we wanted to know, how is the public reacting to these spaces? What are they put off by? What do they enjoy? Those sorts of things. You know, we were able to find out, for instance, from Martin Guitar, that people like to get married there. And they always want their pictures in front of the native garden because there's so many like butterflies and it's so picturesque. And people, when they take out, you know, people who work at Martin Guitar take their lunch and they go and sit in that garden. So these are the things that we were able to kind of get by interviewing our garden partners. We worked with master gardeners, I mentioned them before, to do general surveys of the public about native plants. So every time they would go table somewhere, they would take surveys that we had developed to sort of get a gauge of like, well, okay, the general public that we're trying to connect with, how many of them, you know, what are the things that they understand about native plants? Do they care? Do they want to know more? Would they like to use them in their landscape? So we just gathered all of that information to try to create, again, like the end goal was to create a practical guide, to create a practical guide for residents that would be really super useful. So, so now I'm going to get to the book, and I'm going to show you just a couple things. So this book is more extensive than what I'm going to show you. I'm just going to show you a couple highlights, but you know, kind of everything that we learned over that 5-year period sort of went into the construction of this book. So everything that we learned about design, everything we learned about what people needed to know, you know, we tried to build into the book. So the book does have a number of designs in it, you know, kind of that you can sort of tweak to make your own. So I'm just going to go over like this is sort of an example, sample design template. I'm just going to go over the parts of it. So what we did when we were trying to figure out, well, what kind of designs do we want to show? I thought of, well, you know, what are the most that I could think of? What are the most common like small yard scenarios where you might put a garden? So, you know, that's how we kind of developed the array. So each one has, you know, a site condition. There are conditions in terms of like how much sun it gets and how wet it gets. And there's a specific array of plants for a variety of conditions. I'll show you that in just a moment. There's a drawing on graph paper. I love my graph paper, but it's meant to sort of be able to, you can expand or contract that depending on your spacing. And then, you know, there's a little color palette here and some pictures of the plants themselves, and you know, the specific plants that are shown here are listed here. So you know, I'm just going to show you now some examples from the book that we have. So every garden design has starts with a drawing of that garden. So this is a corner garden, okay? And here's a drawing. And I do want to just make mention of this here. This drawing and all the drawings in this book were done by Tom Maxfield, who's just an amazing artist. And his wife, Carrie Maxfield, laid this whole book out. So she's the one who sort of designed the look of the book. The garden designs are mine, but they're the ones who made it look good, Carrie and Tom Maxfield. So I just wanted to mention them. So corner garden, this is the design for that garden space. So here's, you know, again, here's what it looks like. Here's the sort of map view design. It's divided into sort of like short, medium, tall. So there's these layers, right? They all start with sort of helpful hints. This is, these are the plans for drier and more sun conditions. But if you have other conditions, you just flip the page and you see these are all, you know, the other things: drier and more shade, wetter and more shade, wetter and more sun. These are all color coded: green, pink, purple. So you can just slip them right in: green, pink, purple. That's the way it's supposed to work. So we have container garden. So that person with the, that can only use containers, there are ideas, different things, different ideas, different native plants that you can do in containers. Here's the small water feature garden. I'm just going to flip through these quickly because you can get this online and look at it if you so desire. Sidewalk strip garden, if you just have that's your only garden space is the strip out, next to the sidewalk in front of your house. There's some ideas. Downspout garden, rock wall garden, front porch garden, same kind of situation. Mailbox garden. Again, we were just trying to think of if you have a small property, what are all the spaces that you could garden in? So no doubt we missed some, but back patio garden. Okay. And then within the book, there's also a sort of very extensive native plant table. And this is a listing of plants for small spaces, natives for small spaces. So, there are native plants that are very aggressive and spread a lot and probably are not great for a small yard. So they are not included in this table. They are lovely plants, but they are difficult to deal with in a small space. So, so this is not an exhaustive list of natives, but actually ones that work pretty well in a small space. The table is meant to be used if you are someone who, maybe you have wetter or drier and more sun conditions, and you want to use some of these plants, but you can't find one, right? You can't find one at your nursery or whatever. So you can just go over to the handy table and you can figure out, how tall is it and how much light does it need and how moist does it get? And you can match, what this plant needs and just insert that plant right into the design, if that makes sense. So it's meant to just be another resource for people to use for the designs, or if you don't need the design, maybe you're making your own design and you can use this table to help you think about what your own design might look like too. So this table goes on, and I'm just showing you page 1. So what we also realized is during those interviews with people and just generally working with people in their native plant gardens is that they had trouble figuring out what the weeds were and what the plants were. So we wanted to do some drawings of just common yard weeds. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the weeds. And this is not there are several more pages of the yard weeds, but we wanted to give people sort of at least what does the leaf look like and, what's the flower look like so that they could figure that out. Common invasives in gardens. So these would be, again, more pages of this in the book, but these are invasive plants where that, you're gonna maybe find in a nursery and bring home and think it's okay. And really it's not. So we wanted people to have pictures of those things. This is in the book too, some, commonly sold invasives and then what you can buy instead that is native and, sort of the features that you would have in the native that is very similar to the features that, might seem pretty nice in the invasive. So this is, again, one of the things in the book. All right, so lessons learned from over that 5-year project. These I wanted to present mostly to anyone here listening who's trying to work with community about and trying to engage people in using native plants. So because, we had a lot of experience with that by the end. So what we learned is that partners, some of those community partners and residents, we did work with residents on, especially during those workshops and things, that people with just even a little bit of gardening experience or expertise somewhere in their, staff or people who are associated with that group, we just had the littlest bit of gardening experience that was very helpful. And to the success of those projects. We found, and I mentioned this before, the more invested the partner was, the better the project, worked out in the end. The more people were owned it, they wanted, they need to own it. Maintenance is the hardest part. Part of my visits going back to those post installation, back to those gardens 3 times a year, the maintenance was some of the things that I talked again and again to our partners about. Not that they weren't doing the work, but sometimes they just needed some strategies for how to deal with certain things. So that was definitely an ongoing conversation that we had, particularly for for places or groups that really wanted to experiment with natives but didn't have a lot of gardening experience. We did find that shrubs were a better place to start than perennials. They're just easier to understand. They're just less hassle in some ways if you're not really someone who loves to mess around with flowers. So it just seemed to work better in at least in some cases. We encouraged all partners to start small, and residents for sure start small. I think we all have, and I know I count myself in this, sometimes we just want to like change everything, make your yard all one way or whatever, this summer. It's a lot. I think better to start if people are kind of new to natives, to start with 1 or 2 plants, learn them, move, expand a little at a time. I think that, seemed to be like a much more sustainable way of kind of introducing people to natives. The signs in those public projects were very important, very important. And people really, really respond to birds and butterflies that come to these places, even if they didn't think that they ever cared about that sort of thing. People do really, that does make a difference. I'm going backwards. And then, in the end, so we had all that researchy stuff, that social science and whatever, and that thinking in the beginning. So at the end, what we realized was that design and beauty are important to people. So people do want beautiful spaces. Thinking about the design a little bit in the beginning helps a lot to make something that people feel like is right for them. Again, connection to wildlife, birds, cost matters. So, several of the things that we did, we started a Facebook page that was a perennial exchange page for people who didn't, wanted the plants, but maybe couldn't afford to buy native plants, or so they could trade with each other. We encouraged, we sent people to master gardeners who have a perennial exchange every year. And, there are perennial exchanges in neighborhoods. I know I enjoy the one I go to every year. So, there are ways to get natives in a way that is, that you can do, even if cost is prohibiting you a little bit. There are other ways to get those plants. Maintenance, again, we wanted to be super clear with people that weeding was a thing with gardens. You have to do that. So I think that's good to be clear about it in the beginning. And peer pressure, that idea that people want to fit in, that is a real thing. I think it's a real thing, but change is possible over time. I think 40 gardens in public places, a lot of education, with residents in that 2-county area over 5 years. We have a lot more native plant gardens and native people using native plants than we did before the project. And we hope that and I think it's true that the book we put together, it seems to be something that's useful, and that was the whole idea, to develop something that was useful. I'm going to end here by just showing you a few pictures of my house. It was described here that, or in the beginning, that we have like 70 different kinds of native plants on our property. So that was my count as I was walking around the yard like 2 days ago. But then, after I counted that and reported that, then my husband and I were talking later. He loves native plants too. So we were talking later, and then we realized it's like closer to 100. Like there was a whole bunch I didn't count because I forgot about them or they're not up yet. So this is our yard. It's not very, it's very early spring. It's very cold. It's cold today. So things are slow to come out, and it really does look a lot more lush than this. But I just wanted to show you that we do have lawn. We have a lot of lawn. This is our sort of, I feel like, pretty normal looking yard, even though we have not very much space, and we have nearly 100 different types of native plants. This is the corner of my yard. This is me looking down the street. I have neighbors on that side. I have neighbors on the other side. I have neighbors behind me. I have neighbors across the street. So, we live in a community. This is my community. We live, right here, Pennsylvania. There's New Jersey. So we're right on the eastern edge of Pennsylvania. And here's my backyard. And I just want to show this because, what I know is that you can, and we have lots and lots of different things that come into our yard. Our yard looks pretty normal, I think. People like it in our very small neighborhood. And we have a lot of different kinds of native plants, even in this very small space. So it's quite possible to have tons of variety and different things. And you can see anybody looking, there's a lot of ornamentals mixed in. I do have my grandmother's lilacs and lots of plants from different people too. I love, those plants are like memories and things like that for me too. These are pictures I took like mid-May last year. So just, some glimpses of different parts of our yard. And then finally, my husband is a fantastic photographer, and these are all pictures that he took of natives and the life in our yard just over the last year. So, this is just to give you a sense of like the array. And that is all I have. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate. That was an incredible presentation. There are a lot of compliments to you in the chat coming in now and all throughout. People are writing inspiring. You had me, I have to say, your first slide, a bleeding heart, which is one of my favorite plants. And you had a lot of spring ephemerals, which I really love. And I feel like your design ideas were so valuable. People have written that they enjoyed your book, that they appreciate your setting of social science, and showing how borders work. So before we go on to questions, and Kate is willing to take questions, I wanted to make 3 announcements. One is that next month we'll be featuring Mike Van Clough, who is the program director of the New Jersey Invasive Species Strike Team, who will speak on native plants and the invasive plants they replace. Kate referred to a table in her book about that, but Mike is going to devote his whole presentation to that. It's going to be on Wednesday, May 18th at 7. Also, I want to urge you, if you're not a member of Native Plant Society of New Jersey, please consider joining. It's only $20 a year for individuals. And also to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We hit 1,000 followers on Instagram today, and we'd like you to be added to that group. So if people have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm going to be monitoring that, and I have been monitoring it. The chat there's hundreds of it. So the chats, if you want to correspond with each other or do general comments, but I'll monitor the Q&A. And I have quite a few questions, Kate, already. So I've tried to divide them into 3 categories. One is about the project, and one is about plants, and one is about the designs. Which category would you like to go first?
We could start with the project if you like.
Okay, that's what I have first. Okay.
Okay.
So one thing is, someone asked also, I'm sorry, I'm just getting a message from one of my colleagues, and I want to do this, is to please apologize. I know some people had trouble getting in today. So on behalf of Native Plant Society, we want to apologize. This recording, I believe, are you consenting to be recorded, right, Kate, and have this available? So it will be on our website for the Native Plant Society, which is www.npsnj.org. It will be there in a few days. So especially because we're apologizing, I urge you to go look at that if you missed parts of it or got on late, as I know people did. I was receiving texts about that too. So on the project, one of the simple questions is where did your funding come from? Someone wanted to ask that.
Sure. So it came from primarily from the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation, but we were also funded by the Lehigh Valley Greenways, which is a part of the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resource. They funded the plants themselves, the physical plants and things that were used to put the gardens in. And then I was also, my salary, which was part-time, was paid by a private donor who wants to remain anonymous, but those were all the funding mechanisms.
Great. And people have asked about how they can get the book. I think that you've answered that here with this slide. On the book question, people also asked about the books that you recommended to libraries. Several of our listeners are librarians. Is there a way do you have access to that?
I can get you that. Can I email that to you and then you could pass that on? Would that be all
Yes,
right?
I think what we'll do is we'll try to post that on the website along with your recording on our website. So we're looking for that. I think that would be a great resource. I know I was recently asked by a neighbor who was making a raffle basket for her child's school on ideas of books.
Yeah.
So just because I know people may not have time to go look at that link, what are a couple of children's books that you recommend if you remember from that list?
Yeah, so I'm not going to probably be able to come up with them right now because it's been a while. It's been, since 2018 I was doing that. So it's been a few years. Yeah, so I'm sorry, but I'll definitely will send you the list though, for sure.
That's great. That's great. And then someone asked if they could use your illustrations like they teach at a cooperative extension. Do you give people, I know you give people access to your book for free. What about the illustrations?
Yeah, I mean, that's not really for me to give, that the illustrations were done by, as I said, Tom Maxfield, who's an artist, so I don't feel that I have permission to give away his work. But certainly the book can be used. And I think as long as, I don't know what the situation was, but, and if it's you could do a screenshot of the work, but as long as it's cited, I think that's fine.
That sounds like a great solution.
Yeah.
Someone just put in the chat that a great children's book is When the Shad Bush Blooms. So,
yeah, that sounds fabulous. And I don't know that book, but that's a great, there's such a nice story with that. I would imagine.
People can look in the chat for those ideas. And then the last question about the project is, what was the response of the landscaper? Someone wrote that they were really thrilled that you involved landscapers, and what was the response?
Yeah, you mean the conference that we did?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a good, it was a good response. We had, I would say I would have loved to have had more landscapers than we got there, but we got a pretty good amount. We offered continuing education credits for landscapers, which was helpful, so they could come there and get that. But yes, I think that's a tremendous need to, continue to try to educate our landscapers.
Yes, it is. It is. So that's great that you did that. I think we often, our community doesn't often talk about that. So
yeah,
great that you did that. Okay, on to designs. So one person asked, did you do soil testing of these sites, and do you recommend soil testing?
We did not do soil testing, but yes, I think soil testing is a smart thing to do. Yeah, we did not do that. And I would say also that I don't know that our project suffered much for it. The Lehigh Valley, though, is a very lush, it's a farming community traditionally. So it has very good soils, a lot of it. So I don't know how much of a difference that might have made.
I'm going to interrupt our questions to cite another book that someone wrote in about, which is written by a New Jersey, one of our favorite New Jersey nurseries, the Puddle Garden, which comes out of the owners of the Wild Ridge Nursery. So
yeah,
that's a nice.
And that book was on our list.
Yes, and I bought that book and given it away myself in raffle baskets. So it's a great book.
Yeah.
So someone asked, are the plant recommendations in your book native to our region?
I would say mostly yes, but it depends on what kind of region. I would they're native to the Northeast for the most part. There are probably some that are slightly beyond that too.
Mhm.
So yeah. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I really agree with you myself from experience in private and public gardens about maintenance and
Mhm.
about shrubs, probably because they're easier to maintain.
Yeah.
So someone asked, what were the maintenance strategies that you found to be successful? Other than warning people that maintenance is required.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I say is it's plants' job in life to reproduce. So
Mhm.
they are going to reproduce and therefore you will have more and you have to take care of that.
Yeah. The one strategy that we really tried to encourage and that I did try to implement in the designs was, basically it's this, that you want to cover, you don't want any bare soil. Bare soil is an invitation for a weed. So this idea of layers and layering things. And if you can get your natives to kind of grow in this sort of interlocking layered way, you do have to weed, but it's like a lot less, because you don't have that sort of bare soil. And some people are very attached to mulch, and if they wanted to do that, of course, you saw pictures that they did. And in some cases we bought mulch for the gardens because that just was the right thing for that particular place. But for the most part, we didn't use mulch, and we encourage people not to do that because, of course, if you are, work with natives, they kind of drift around, some of them, and we wanted that to happen. So we wanted to allow that. So mostly we encourage people to have to plant densely enough where they didn't have bare soil between their plants.
That sounds like a good solution. And then one of the last questions on design is, how do we get professionally made signs, or how did you get them? Do you have any recommendations for that? That may be hard to remember.
So I did the designs of the signs, and I used like Adobe. There's a design. I can't remember now. It was Adobe something or something or other, but I can't remember what it was because again, it's been a few years. And then we got them professionally printed, and we shipped them to an organization that Lehigh Gap Nature Center had used for other signs. So I think they were located in Maryland. So we would ship the design, we would send them the designs and they would ship us the signs.
Okay, great. So someone asked, and so I'm going to segue now into questions about plants.
Okay.
And someone asked a question which may be too hard, is how to turn a hot mess of a garden that's weeds and mixtures of different plants into a native garden. Like, what do you do if you already have a big garden that's full of stuff? Like, would you start by taking everything out? And
I guess I'm all for this incremental process, like I would say, no, don't try. If it's a really big garden, don't try to just rip everything out and start over. And I mean, unless you really feel like energetic and excited by that. But I do think that native plants, you have to know what your plants will do. You have to kind of understand whether they're going to live in your yard. There are people, we have plants that just won't live in our yard for whatever reason, even though they'll live a few doors down. So you kind of have to just try things. Most things live in our yard, but some things just won't. And so I think, do incrementally, get something that works and then kind of expand out slowly. That would be my suggestion.
sounds good. I'm seeing people asking for a live link for the book in the chat. I think it's been put there, but maybe we can do that again for our tech person, Mike. Thank you. So another plant question is, someone said that they planted natives last year and they're wondering when they can expect to see them. which I think is a really good question. So like, when will they sprout, you know?
Yeah. And it's very different depending on what plants they are. Some of them come up very late, some of them are earlier. Like Joe Pyeweed, for instance, it's always really late to appear in our yard anyway. So it just depends on what the plant is, I think.
And I will mention that if you don't mind if I mention something, that
Yeah, oh,
milkweeds are very late to emerge.
yeah, absolutely.
So I often tell people, in general, one tip I would say too for maintenance is to label, put sticks in your garden. In the beginning, I didn't do that. I thought, oh, it won't look so pristine. And I thought that was dumb. I should put sticks so I know where I planted things, and especially with things like milkweed that come up late.
Yeah.
So a lot of things haven't come up yet to that person who asked.
For sure. Yeah. Well, you saw the pictures of our yard that looks kind of it's very sparse in certain areas. We're just waiting. We're waiting for the stuff to come up. So yeah, it's still
So
early.
someone asked, what is the purple plants at Martin's guitar?
The purple plants.
On your, if you remember.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Let's go back and look at those. Some of those were probably things that they had there before, which was a kind of a geranium that wasn't native, but we might have tried to match it a little bit. Let me see. Here we go. Yeah, this is like a cranesbill geranium, not a native plant. So this is sort of like, this is kind of where the two gardens met, the traditional landscaping and ours met. This is native bleeding heart. So, and this area back here is full of native plants. So we were kind of trying to blend into their original landscape, which was still, they still had all of that stuff, and we were just trying to seamlessly kind of blend in. So that those were not things that we planted.
Okay, great. So since you mentioned mulch, there's more questions about mulch. And one of the questions is, will plants come up through mulch the next year?
Yes, to some degree. I mean, some things don't deal well with mulch. Like I'm thinking, if anybody knows the plant bee balm, bee balm likes to drift around and move around and does not really like mulch very much. Cardinal flower, if you know that one, also sort of similar things. So if you use mulch, you definitely kind of probably rule out getting some of those things to come back year after year. Personally, I do not use mulch. I use that layered thing. It does require a little bit more maintenance, and you have to know what your plants look like, because I'm moving the cardinal flower from here to there. My husband is more likely. He's the cardinal flower. They're like his babies. but yeah, so you can, but it won't work for all plants for sure.
So people have said in the chat that one thing in terms of identifying the plants and knowing what's coming up is to leave the plants, the stalks, like milkweed, then you'll know what's there. And I would say that's also true with leaving your leaves, and the plants definitely will come up through the leaves. I've did experiments of, I used to take some of the leaves away over like where my violets are, which is right where I sweep all the leaves. And last year I just left them all. And it came up. I took pictures of how many leaves were there, and they all come up. So I guess leaves are less dense. They're more porous than the mulch. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Leaves as mulch can be actually really, really helpful and really good. We also leave our leaves, unless they're really, really thick, we leave them there. And they're a great cover for like during winter, to have your leaves over your plants. It just protects the plants better. And, in the early spring too, protects them from cold, things like that. So yeah.
So another plant related question, which I find that I encounter also, is, did you encounter people who were worried about getting stung by bees? You mentioned that people like butterflies and birds, but they don't always like the bees.
Yeah, we do. We did get that. Absolutely. We did a whole bunch of native plant gardens in the city of Allentown, like in this, city where people had tiny little postage stamp properties, and a lot of them were concerned about bees. Um, and there are certain plants that attract a lot of bees. Look, so I'm thinking of mountain mint, for instance. Fantastic pollinator plant, but would I put it in near my, where I sit on my patio? No, I would not. So it is in my yard, but I think sometimes when we know, if we know those plants are attract a lot of wasps, a lot of bees, from a design standpoint, maybe that's a plant you don't put near, a porch or a sitting area or whatever. So I think it's just being smart about which plants you put where, yeah.
I also see a few questions about deer. I know that Mike Van Cleef will probably talk about deer to some degree next month, because deer are almost invasive too, in the terms of being
Yeah.
way outnumbered. So, but I would just say to those, if there are lists of plants that, and there's a list on the Native Plant Society website of plants that are deer resistant. So, and we've also had talks, and the recordings are on the Native Plant website of all about deer. So I don't want to get into that with you tonight, but just want to acknowledge that concern and that there are lists. No plant is deer proof, however.
No. Deer typically don't like scented things. Like I mentioned, mountain mint, that can be powerful kind of fence in some ways, but nothing is deer proof. That's correct.
But some things are better than others, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of anything
Yep.
that's, like you said, that has that strong smell, or milkweeds in general, or ferns or sedges. So someone asked, the question was, what size plants did you use for these projects? Plugs or bigger plants?
We use bigger plants. Typically, sometimes we use plugs. It depended on the size of the garden. If it was a really, really larger project, then we did use some plugs. But mostly we used plants. And that was mostly because we were working with people who, only had so much time, only had so much knowledge, and just have that very distinctive full, size plant was often helpful. We did, I didn't talk about it, but in the book, we did a lot of work with shrubs, but we definitely used smaller scale shrubs primarily, because we were really working in smaller spaces, and some of those are featured in the book too.
Someone just also mentioned in the chat, that I'll amplify this, that Rutgers has a great list online of deer resistant plants. If you just Google Rutgers deer resistant. I do want to caution you though, that list includes not only non-natives like introduced plants, it even includes, I think, some invasives. So please don't use that as a plant list, but it's a good deer resistant list if you have plants too that you want to look up. So this may be a hard question, but a person asked, I think it's a great question. What are 5 top natives that you would recommend?
5 top natives. Well, I mean, I do love, small native trees. So, I mean, I would say like redbud, surfaceberry, or shadbush. Those are definitely up there. For a ground cover, I really love ginger, wild ginger. I think it's a fantastic ground cover option. There's a lot of native phlox, but I haven't met one yet that I didn't like. So those are just a really great in the landscape. And I think I don't know that I'm really giving you my top 5, but these are the ones that are coming to my mind. Amsonia, I just love that plant. I don't know that that's really native to our particular area, but it in terms of like a texture in the garden and a color, it's really, really a beautiful option.
Okay, well, those are some nice recommendations. And someone asked, is it a fool's errand to plant natives, for example, that need water? And they use the example of swamp milkweed in a place with no water source.
Yes. Yes, I think you have to plant for the conditions that you have, or you're just going to be spending a lot of time and work and energy trying to maintain something that's not really sustainable. So I definitely recommend planting for the conditions you have. And there's a lot of options for any, whatever you have, there are definitely nice options.
I also would add to that, I totally agree with you, but I would add to that many natives are more flexible than introduced plants, because after all, they are acclimated to our climate. And I want to use the example of swamp milkweed, because swamp milkweed, despite its name, does not need to be in water. So I thought, or near water. I think you're totally right that you cannot force a plant to live where it doesn't want to live. But swamp milkweed I have growing in my house, in my sidewalk strip, which is dry and salty and terrible. So
Excellent.
then, do daffodils work as pollinator plants? Someone asked.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by pollinator plants. Do insects come to those plants? I think so. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the whole pollinator relationship is complex and probably, a whole other talk. But yes, they can provide food to pollinators. I would think so. Yes.
Okay, I think we can go on and on, but I think that I'm looking just to see. So let's end with a nursery question, because someone did ask about nurseries. So where do we find lists of nurseries? And then someone asked a related question, which are, what are native plants easy to find at nurseries if you can't get to a native plant sale? I think that's a very good question.
So, sorry, what the question
I'm
is?
sorry, what are some plants that are easy to find at nurseries if you can't get to a native plant sale? Like,
yeah,
what are commonly available plants?
Sure. No, that is a good question. Coneflower is one of those things that you can almost always find. I'm thinking, and if anybody can chime in here, that would be fine. Phlox are often, things that you can also find, different kinds of phlox in a regular nursery.
Milkweeds, people are chiming in the chat, and I think that's true.
Sometimes you can find those for sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of ideas in the chat. Coreopsis.
Yeah, that Coreopsis is a good one. You can definitely find native shrubs and trees in nurseries as well. That's typically pretty easy to find.
And what is your opinion about cultivars, native plants?
Well, there's different schools of thought. Generally, I think people would say that cultivars, depending on how different they are from the straight species, they still serve generally, a lot of the same functionality. I don't know. That's what I've heard. I'm not an expert in that realm, though. That's probably not something that you should trust my opinion on.
That's fine. It's been talked about at many other of our presentations, and I'm sure will be talked about at many more. So on the nurseries, there are lists of nurseries on the native plant site and our society webpage. Also, New Jersey Friendly Yards is a good resource in general and has a list of native nurseries in New Jersey. And were there other nursery lists that you used?
We primarily sourced all of our material from a nursery called Edge of Woods, which is located in the Lehigh Valley. So that's where they are a strictly native plant nursery.
Okay. Well, I think that is a very long evening for you between your presentation and the questions. So thank you so much, Kate Brandis, for sharing all of your knowledge with us, for your project is so inspiring, and even more for sharing your book with us and with everyone else. Because I think that's a great resource for everyone to have. And there's lots of thanks coming in on the chat for you. So
Great.
you did a
Well,
great job. And
thank you.
happy planting, everyone. Happy Native Plant Month in April. And I am going to just say, because I've seen this question asked and answered in the chat, but I'll say again, this recording will be on the Native Plant Society of New Jersey website. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and become a member if you're not already. And tune in on May 18th for Mike Finkler. Thanks again, Kate. Take care.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Deb. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.